This is the ultimate question. What phone should I buy? At $300 or less, this phone sits in a nice price point for the specs. But is it worth it? Let's find out. Should you buy the OnePlus 7 Pro in 2021? Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review. Check out the social media listed above if you want to talk tech, and subscribe if you want to continue watching tech. Let's get started. While the screen is starting to show its age when compared to modern day flagship phones, this is still an amazing screen. By the way, this is actually the same screen as the OnePlus 7T Pro. This is a curved 6.67 inch 1440p fluid AMOLED display with a pixel density of 516 pixels per inch and a 90Hz refresh rate. As for the image, it actually looks amazing, and the 19.5:9 screen ratio fits the phone size pretty well. As for the brightness, I never really thought it was bad, with the exception of being outside in direct sunlight, but it apparently only hits 450 nits, which is pretty low for this caliber of a phone. Still, the screen is always pretty bright for me and never really killed my eyes at full brightness. It's really been like a happy medium. The issue some people did have with the Pro model was that it's curved glass, while the regular 7 is just flat. As for watching video and looking at images, that 90Hz refresh rate and 1440p make content pop, something that even some modern day flagship phones fail to do. Notice that there's no mention of the front camera, because that isn't on the front of the phone. So you actually get a full, uninterrupted display with very minimal bezels, forehead, and chin. And when you put it in a case, it's actually easy to forget all of those things. By the way, this phone does feature an in-screen fingerprint sensor, which works really well even with the tempered glass screen protector that I have on this phone. When it comes to viewing content, the screen is really made for darker images, but still it's able to perform on par with something like an iPhone XS Max, just not the same brightness. Moving forward, we do have to remember one thing. Even with the Pro in its name, it's not actually supposed to be a flagship phone. With this said, OnePlus did a lot to make sure that it does feel like a flagship phone, and the specs prove it. We are given the Snapdragon 855 chip with 6 to 12 gigabytes of RAM, mine being the latter, and 128 or 256 gigabytes of UFS 3.0 storage. Funny enough, this is actually the first phone with UFS 3.0 storage. While the Samsung Galaxy Fold was the first to announce it, they weren't actually the first to get it into the hands of consumers. This has been surpassed with UFS 3.1, but it isn't a huge jump like UFS 2.1 to 3.0 was, moving from 1,200 megabytes per second to 2,900 megabytes per second in bandwidth speed. In English, that means that the speed was over 2 times faster when copying and extracting data from the phone. Mix that with the processor and 90Hz display, and this was actually the fastest phone out at launch, but eventually it was beat months later. Today it is slowing down, just like Samsung S10 series phones are, but realistically it still feels comparable to something like a Samsung S20 FE. This is obviously due to the processor and the memory, but also Oxygen OS 11, which has recently been getting more and more updates. With this said, OnePlus has definitely been lagging behind until now, which makes me believe that this phone will see Android 12, as it should, but the future is questionable. With this said, this phone is easy to root and modify, so if you're not afraid of modifying the software, this phone should last you a very long time. On the bottom, we are given a single or dual SIM slot, depending on if your phone is from a carrier or from OnePlus, respectively. Next to that is a microphone in the antenna band, an interesting choice, with the middle of the phone being a USB-C 3.1 port that supports 30 watts of charging, as well as another microphone. I never used the charger that the phone came with, but it still charges really fast on other chargers with power delivery, which is surprising because all I can find is that this phone actually supports 15 watts of charging on non-OnePlus chargers, which is really nothing special anymore. Still, this charges up the 4000 mAh battery fairly quick. Speaking of, 4000 mAh isn't really that special nowadays. I can see that the battery is degrading, as I've used this phone a fair amount over the past 2 years, but it still lasts me a full day with regular usage. Even now, a full day should be easy to do for most people, which is nice to see. Continuing with the frame, we have the bottom loudspeaker, which is paired with the top loudspeaker, both sounding really good for the design. Not the best, but they do sound very solid and clear whether it's watching movies or listening to music. On the side of the phone, we have a shiny aluminum frame. The thing I like about it is that while it is a finger and scratch magnet, it actually changes colors from light to dark, at least on the Nebula Blue version. It's a nice little touch that actually took me some time to notice. On the left side we have the volume buttons, while on the right side we have the alert slider and the power button, the former allowing you to set your phone from ring to silent to vibrate very quickly, just like the iPhone. Something that you notice when doing this is how the haptics feel, which actually feel pretty solid, and honestly they feel better than the OnePlus 9, which is kind of surprising. Moving to the top, we can talk a little bit about why this phone is not only 206 grams in weight, but also one of my favorite phones of all time, the pop-up camera. This is one of the first versions of the pop-up camera, so it could be better, but it pops up so quick, and even to this day it feels impressive. And no, it did not break, and it still works perfectly fine, except for one aspect, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The only other issue is that the camera is metal, so it seems to have gained some light scratches simply from moving up and down, possibly from dust, or maybe similar to how the Nintendo Switch gets its scratches. Lastly, the back is also glass and has this nice powder coating if you get the blue one, while the mirror gray and almond are glossy. This is capable of scratching, but has held up pretty well over the last few years. But let's be honest, this is the best color to get. I'm serious because I'm almost positive that the Nebula Blue was the only one that you can get the 12GB RAM with 256GB of storage all in one package. Now we reach the interesting area, the cameras. The rear camera setup was a monster back in 2019, as well as being controversial. The main wide-angle sensor was an optically stabilized 48-megapixel Sony IMX586, with an f1.6 aperture and would shoot 12 megapixel shots normally with the option for 48 megapixel shots. While in most cases the regular 12 megapixel shots worked, the 48 megapixel shot option was there, which is nice to see. With that said, I love the superior point and shoot, and even now I prefer this option even with Nightscape in the camera app. It feels like the regular exposure from the sensor is often better than what Nightscape would give me, but that's just my personal opinion. Overall, this is still an outstanding camera and will not beat modern day flagship phones from Apple or Samsung, but it will kill pretty much anything in the used price point. Then we have the 16 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, which works. It gets better with software updates, but I never really bragged about this sensor, but it's still nice to see in the phone. It's also nice to see that Nightscape works with this sensor, which definitely is a good thing, but it doesn't work on the last one. The last sensor is a controversial 8 megapixel 3x telephoto sensor, which ended up being a 2.2x 13 megapixel sensor, I guess. Not entirely sure, I kind of forgot about it, but honestly the shots that were given from the sensor were okay. It has optical image stabilization, but the colors weren't the same as a normal sensor unless you were given a lot of natural light. As for video, we do get 4K at 60 frames per second out of the main sensor, which is nice to see, but disappointing for those that want it out of the ultra-wide sensor. That one is limited to 30 frames per second. As for the 60 FPS video, you can be the judge of the stabilization. As for the sensor area, we are given a lonely dual LED flash and a laser autofocusing unit, both that work well, with the former being really only used as a flashlight for me. As for the front camera, disappointment. They slapped a 16 megapixel camera in this, which wasn't really too disappointing at launch, but it kind of is now. The shots are decent, and it's disappointing to me because it lacks optical image stabilization, which isn't a huge deal, but video is only at 1080p at 30 frames per second. Obviously, 1080p at 60 frames per second seems possible to do, but lacking that and 4K at any frame rate is just annoying. This is not really good for those who want to vlog with this camera. The phone is capable of shooting that video, it's just OnePlus said no. Just like the optical image stabilization, I can give the fixed focus part a pass because it does have the pop-up function. Another thing that I noticed is that this little halo pops up on the bottom area of the camera. I thought the glass was dirty, but no, it just seems to happen sometimes. However, this front camera works perfectly for face unlock and honestly works really fast. While the downsides to this phone can seem important, they're really just regular nitpicking. After all, the phone was $669 brand new for the 6GB RAM, 128GB storage option, while the 12GB RAM, 256GB storage option felt like a steal at $750 flat. I actually remember paying no tax on this phone and only had to pay a foreign transaction fee of like $15. Nowadays, good examples of this phone can be found for less than $300, which is still pretty good, given that the Samsung S10 Plus is about the same price. Sure, the camera isn't the best, but there's a lot of other aspects that make this phone so amazing even today. While this phone is not certified for water resistance, OnePlus says that this phone should survive things like being dunked in a bucket of water. The reasoning is because the IP certification is not free and would add about $30 to every phone's normal price. With that said, any phone outside of its 1-year warranty has the chance of losing its water resistance capabilities, so take all that info with a grain of rice. The phone also lacks a headset jack and wireless charging, the latter which would also cost more money for certification, but it's a bummer in my eyes. Sure, charging is really fast, but I do like the convenience of wireless charging over plugging in the phone all the time. Really, those are the only things that stick out to me when it comes to finding issues with this phone. I've owned this phone since it was launched, even going to the T-Mobile launch to buy the phone, later returning that one because the unlocked one is better in so many other ways. And at the end of the day, this is still my go-to phone, with the Samsung Z Fold 2 trying to take over that crown. Yes, a phone that costs $300 used is competing with a phone that costs $1,400 used for the top spot in my eyes. If that doesn't tell you what you need to know, I don't know what will. So, should you buy this phone in 2021? I would absolutely say yes. Overall, this is a capable, fast, reliable, and highly customizable phone that doesn't seem to be slowing down. Sure, the availability of software updates in the future are questionable, but there are still so many people out there that can help you make sure that you can unofficially update this phone pretty much forever. I normally don't keep phones for this long, but this phone is special to me, and lots of people seem to agree. And that's my review of the OnePlus 7 Pro, the non-flagship phone that feels like a flagship phone. But what do you think? Let me know in the social media listed above, and as always, thanks for watching.